Before the world feared the name Xerxes, his own palace did. Behind the gold walls of Persepolis, past the columns carved with lions and winged gods, past the torchlit courtyards where servants walked barefoot so their steps made no sound, there stood a set of doors no outsider ever entered. There the air smelled not of incense or flowers, but of cold stone, oil lamps, and secrets. And inside those rooms lived the daughters of the King of Kings. To the world, they were jewels of Persia pure, revered, untouchable. But within the palace, they were something far more fragile. They were instruments of empire, and prisoners of their father's fear. Xerxes ruled a land so vast its borders touched oceans and mountains the Greeks had no names for. His armies blotted out the sun, his wealth rivaled myth. But power like his breeds two things: worship and paranoia. Somewhere along his reign, the balance between the two slipped. The man became a shadow of the god he was supposed to imitate, and when a king begins to fear shadows, everyone suffers. They say Xerxes began to see omens, bad ones. A vulture circling above the palace, a statue cracking along the face, a mirror that showed a reflection standing behind him, even though the room was empty. Persians whispered that the gods were warning him his bloodline would betray him. And to Xerxes, there was nothing more dangerous than betrayal from within his own house. So he turned his gaze on his daughters. Each one was raised in silk and silence. They were taught to walk without sound, speak only when spoken to, and keep their eyes lowered in the presence of their father. Their world was a series of locked doors. Their friends were their attendants. Their only view of the outside was a narrow slit in the stone that showed nothing but sky. But Xerxes believed that royal daughters possessed something volatile, something that could either preserve his empire or destroy it. He believed their dreams were prophetic, that their emotions could influence the gods, that a single whispered rebellion from their lips could topple the throne itself. So he did what tyrants do when fear and superstition consume them. He created rituals. Rituals meant to test loyalty. Rituals meant to break disobedience. Rituals meant to keep daughters from becoming threats. The first ritual began on the night of a great storm. The thunder shook the gold plates on the palace walls. Lightning flashed behind the silk curtains like fire trying to break in. Xerxes summoned his eldest daughter, still barely a woman, into the Hall of Echoes. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness. Torches were arranged in a perfect circle, creating a single pool of light in the center. In that light, a stone platform waited, cold, bare, unforgiving. No one knows exactly what Xerxes said to her, but servants later whispered that he spoke of loyalty, of obedience, of the god's judgment on royal blood. And then he ordered her onto the stone. The ritual was not violent, not bloody, not physical. It was something worse. It was psychological. A test designed to crush her will, without leaving a single visible mark. She stood alone while priests chanted around her, low, rhythmic, suffocating. The torches were extinguished one by one until only a single flame remained. Then, even that went out. Total darkness swallowed her. The chanting continued. And somewhere in the dark, someone whispered her name. The girl screamed, and the ritual ended. She was led back to her chambers trembling, her mind fractured by fear of something she couldn't describe. Xerxes watched without emotion. To him, terror was proof of humility, proof of obedience, proof she could be controlled. From that night on, each daughter was subjected to the same ritual. Some broke immediately, falling to their knees, sobbing, begging their father for mercy they would never receive. Others stayed silent, but never slept again without a lamp burning. A few became hollow-eyed, their voices barely above a whisper, their minds trapped somewhere between fear and devotion. Xerxes believed he was protecting his throne, but what he was really doing was destroying his family. The palace attendants were the first to notice the change. They found the princesses staring into mirrors for hours, as if afraid they would see someone else looking back. They found them waking from nightmares so violent, they tore their own bedding. They found them sitting alone in corners, rocking gently, whispering prayers meant for gods who had stopped listening centuries ago. But if anyone tried to comfort them, they recoiled. They had learned that comfort leads to weakness, and weakness leads to punishment. Xerxes did not see this as suffering. He saw it as purification, because to him, a daughter who felt nothing, feared nothing, desired nothing, was a daughter who could never betray him. But the palace began to fracture under the weight of his rituals. court officials whispered behind closed doors. Nobles avoided the inner chambers. Even the priests who once claimed divine authority began to fear the king they had sworn to guide. And the daughters? Their world shrank further. Guards outside their doors doubled. Windows were covered. Letters from their mothers were intercepted. Their jewelry was removed too sharp. Their books were confiscated too dangerous. Their attendants were changed weekly, no bonds allowed. Xerxes was not protecting his daughters. He was containing them, because in his mind, royal blood was a weapon and only he could control where it pointed. The darkest transformation came with the youngest daughter. She had once been vibrant, laughing in the garden, befriending servants, singing ancient songs. But after 3 rituals, she spoke nothing but whispers. After 5, she stopped speaking at all. After 7, she no longer reacted to her own reflection. The attendants said she seemed not entirely present, as if part of her spirit had fled to escape the walls closing in around her. But what frightened them most was what she began drawing. Symbols. Not Persian. Not known. Shapes that mirrored the star charts the priests used before eclipses. Patterns found only in the oldest Zoroastrian temples. Lines that matched the carvings inside the Hall of Echoes. It was as if the rituals had etched themselves into her mind, and then, one morning, she disappeared. Taken? Hidden? Dead? No one ever learned. Her chambers were sealed. Her name was erased. Her story was buried. The palace understood. When a royal daughter broke too far, she was removed. Not killed. Not punished. Removed. As if she had never existed. That was Xerxes' final cruelty. His daughters did not die. They simply disappeared into silence. But the world outside Persia did not forget. Greek historians, always eager to demonize their enemies, began writing stories, exaggerations, rumors, twisted fragments of truth. They claimed Xerxes did unspeakable things to his daughters, things far worse than death. And though much of it was propaganda, some part of it was rooted in the rituals the palace desperately tried to hide. Because what Xerxes did to his daughters was not physical horror. It was spiritual execution, the killing of identity, the crushing of will, the quiet destruction of a human soul under the weight of a king's fear. That was the truth Greece never understood. The horror was real, just not in the way they imagined. And in part 2, the rituals will reach their final catastrophic form when one daughter refuses, and Xerxes unleashes the most feared punishment in the entire Persian Empire. They said Xerxes feared nothing, neither spear nor prophecy, neither Greek rebellion nor Babylonian fire, but that was a lie whispered by poets, for the truth was written not on clay tablets, but in the trembling breath of those who lived in his palace. The King of Kings feared many things, none more than the disobedience of his own blood. After the vanishing of his youngest daughter, a quiet rot seeped through the palace. Shadows lengthened, lamps dimmed, early servants moved as if wading through cold water, and even the air thickened with an iron-tasting tension as something delicate within. Xerxes snapped a thin tether that had once bound him, however weakly, to mercy. Priests soothed him with promises that the rituals were working, claiming his daughters were vessels of fate. But Xerxes saw the truth. The rituals were hollowing them out, and a hollow vessel could shatter in any direction. So he created a new ritual, whispered only in fear, the trial of the veil, and chose his quiet middle daughter first, a gentle soul who read hymns and fed white doves, whose very softness he believed made her dangerous. Taken at sunset beneath a violent red sky sacred to Mithra, she entered the torchless chamber of the veil, where Xerxes sat in darkness and commanded her to wear the oil-soaked cloth that dimmed sight, sound, light, and hope, warning that removing it meant divine abandonment, a fate she feared more than death. She wore it through hours that twisted into dawn and noon until her breath grew thin, her mind drifting in shadowed illusions, footsteps circling her in a torment no voice answered. While Xerxes watched beyond the chamber, believing fear forged obedience, never realizing how close terror comes to unmaking a mind. When the veil was finally removed, she neither screamed nor blinked. Cold, hollow-eyed, she no longer recognized her own name, and Xerxes, tasting his first sliver of fear, hid her away like the sister before her. No burial, no ceremony. Just silence teaching the palace that a daughter who survived his rituals did not live. She lingered a ghost in royal silk. Only the eldest remained unbroken, sharp, intelligent, questioning, the one whose endurance terrified him. So he created something darker still. The chamber of reflections with obsidian walls and shifting shadows where a priest presented her a bowl of temple water meant to reveal visions. She refused, and when Xerxes emerged to force obedience, the bowl's ripples reflected twisted faces, hers, her sister's in human shapes, even a warped shadow of Xerxes himself. "The water reveals truth," he hissed, and she answered, "Then it will reveal yours," a spark that ignited his frenzy. Torches blazed, priests chanted, water spilled like omens across the stone. And his fear twisted him into ordering a punishment unrecorded in any text. Isolation so complete it was not torture of the body but of existence itself. Days blurred into weeks, her world reduced to silence and stone as the palace whispered that she was being erased. Yet she did not break. She emerged steady, unchanged, a fact that filled Xerxes not with pride, but with fury, for a daughter who endured without losing herself was the one thing he could not control. And then the prophecy appeared, a trembling priest presenting a clay tablet, foretelling a king whose daughters would outlive his empire, whose bloodline would destroy him, a king who feared the wrong enemy. Until Xerxes, reading it again and again with shaking hands, finally understood. The threat was never rebellion, nor his daughters, nor the rituals. The threat was his fear. The last months of Xerxes' reign were a slow-motion unraveling, as if the king's entire life were being pulled apart strand by strand until nothing held. His hair thinned, his eyes grew smaller, and his commands began to tremble at the edges. The palace that once hummed with the quiet machinery of empire now groaned with a different sound, the sound of patience worn thin, of courtiers holding their breath, of servants listening for the next impossible order and wondering whether it would include them. The youngest daughter who had vanished, the middle one who had been smoothed, the eldest who had withstood chamber after chamber of darkness and water and silence, they were no longer merely family. They were oblique dangers, living proofs that Xerxes' rituals might not produce obedience so much as ruin. And ruin, in Xerxes' mind, was contagious. He had always believed power was a matter of geometry. Arrange your guards, fix your altars, keep the right omens close, and the world conforms. But the daughters introduced a kind of chaos no arrangement could contain. Their quiet refusals, their stares that did not plead, and the way one vanished without a trace had shifted the balance between the throne and its myths. If the gods were meant to speak through his bloodline, and the daughters instead spoke silence, then what god did he serve? It was in that brittle climate that the eldest daughter, still unbroken, still lucid, began to gather scraps of knowledge forbidden to women. Old hymns murmured in the dead corners of the palace. Maps of star alignments kept by astronomers who only ever read to male ears, and the names of priests who had sanctioned the darkest rites. She spoke in whispers to a handful of trusted attendance men who had begun to tire of Xerxes' escalations and women who refused to be reduced to instruments. They formed a tiny constellation in the palace night. Not a rebellion in the sense we imagine, but a collection of small resistances, documents, hidden beneath mattress slats. Letters passed inside hollow wooden dolls, quiet meetings by the servants' ovens where maps of the palace were redrawn by candlelight. What they found in those maps horrified them. Caches of records detailing the rites. Lists showing which princesses had been used during which celestial events. Scribbled notes on psychological effects. Faint marginalia by priests admitting the rituals were not infallible. The archaic language made it difficult to be sure of every line, but one margin repeated a phrase over and over. The crown fears what it cannot hold. Word moved like a slow current. It did not sweep the palace at once. It moved through the servants' wings, then to the lower-ranked scribes, then to a few older commanders who remembered a crown that predated Xerxes' anxieties. Each person who heard the truth felt that same chill. The system that justified everything had been built by convincing the powerful that only their violence kept the world whole, and what if that violence was itself the wound? The eldest daughter then did something that no princess in Persia had done in generations. She petitioned the priests. Not in the public court where petitions were staged and read for political effect, but in a private chamber with only one elderly priest present, one who had once taught Xerxes when the king was a boy full of dreams rather than dread. The priest trembled when she unrolled the maps and documents. He had reached old age because he had always whispered truths in the dark, certain they'd die with him. Now they would be witnesses. She did not beg for mercy. She did not plead for her own life. She asked a single question, quiet and precise. On what authority do you claim to wound the blood of the house? The old priest could not answer in the way the laws required. He could only talk about fear and the way fear could grow teeth if fed night after night. He confessed, in the cracked voice of a man who had once believed, that rituals had been designed in ages of famine and invasion to move people into solidarity, not to break their daughters. He said the rites had been corrupted by a generation that forgot the difference between stewardship and ownership. This confession, tender, human but explosive, did what none of the eldest daughter's secret meetings could have done. It gave words to the picture the palace servants were already forming. If a priest who had bound himself to godly lies could admit the truth, then the rituals were not divine law. They were human crimes disguised as theology. Xerxes heard the priest's confession in ways the court had not anticipated. He did not storm the throne room with swords. He was too tired for such theater. Instead, he doubled down in the manner of a man who thinks eliminating witnesses will remove the stain. He issued a quiet decree, a sealed order that dispatched his daughter to the fortress on the edge of the empire, a place so far from the palace that the sea and desert conspired to forget the road. For her protection, the decree said. For the good of the empire, but the palace knew the language of such decrees. It read them as exile and chainmail. The eldest daughter, aware she was being removed, did not plead. She had seen the arc of Xerxes' fear and knew the king would never again stop until he had consumed the very thing he meant to preserve. She wrote letters before she left, letters smuggled out inside the hem of her robe, folded so small they could be mistaken for a child's prayer. Those letters were distributed in the same hush the maps had been passed to sailors, to commanders, to merchants who would carry them beyond the palace walls. It was the letters that finally made the problem one the empire could not ignore. They traveled beyond Persepolis to satraps who had seen the king at his best, men who remembered the just ruler, the lawmaker, the man who once held councils under open sky to hear the voices of the provinces. Reading the letters, they recognized a different Xerxes, narrower, more brittle, a king whose security had corrupted into the strangulation of his family. The satraps petitioned one another. They sent emissaries. They called the councils the ancient way, with banners, with drums, and with the authority of men who would not let a throne dissolve the laws of kingship without consequence. The crisis reached a tipping point when a small, scandalous thing leaked into the Macedonian border, a rumor. Greek ambassadors eagerly reshaped into a story fit for their poets. That Xerxes had ordered the removal of royal daughters and had sanctioned rituals that left them undone. The Greeks, who had learned to frame Persian difference as monstrous, told this to their assemblies. Greek envoys whispered to Persian satraps, and the satraps, who had been sitting in their rooms reading the daughters' letters by night, began to align with the foreign chorus. What the Greeks turned into mockery, the Persians treated as evidence. A palace council was convened, rare in its openness. Generals, satraps, aged priests, and mothers whose daughters wore the silk and the silence. It was not the kind of council that ever convened in Xerxes. Late reign one, where the king's presence was optional and the voices of the provinces were not filtered through fear. They debated not the gods but the law. The law, they argued, had never granted a king the right to dissolve a family. Rather, a king's power flowed from the consent and welfare of his house. Moreover, the empire could not be held together by terror. Fear corroded loyalty into mutiny. It was at that council, in the low light where men tired of obsequiousness finally allowed truth to be spoken, that the eldest daughter's letters were read aloud. Her language was plain and terrible. She described the rituals, the chambers, the veils, the water, the silence, but mostly she described how a house that could not shelter its daughters could not shelter its people. Her argument was simple and devastating. A king who starves his family of trust, starves the empire of legitimacy. Xerxes watched that council as a man watching the slow erosion of a shoreline. He rose to object, to claim divine mandate, to show the tablet that had once held the names of conquerors. But the men around him, those who held armies and satrapies and coins, no longer obeyed on sight. They listened to the daughter's wording, the precise description of harm, then to the priest's half-confession, then to the satrap's accounts of loyalty ticked away like a leak. The law, they said, had been violated. The king's orders, they argued, had been worse than unwise. They had cut into the heart of the state. Power, so often imagined as iron and spear, buckled that day to a different necessity: consensus. A crown needs not only soldiers but social legitimacy. When legitimacy thins, a throne is a hollow thing. What followed was neither an immediate coup nor a clean legal repeal. Xerxes did not die in a burst of violence. He retreated like a man whose illusions had been stripped. He recalled the sealed decrees and ordered a quiet review of the rites. The priests were commanded to account for their practices. Some were dismissed. A few, the oldest, were honored in retirement and forbidden ever again to touch royal blood. The palace opened doors more often. The windows were unbarred. Letters, once intercepted, were allowed to travel. But the damage had already been done in smaller, human ways. 2 of Xerxes' daughters never truly returned to life. Their laughter, their curiosity, their eyes, those things remained partially erased. They married or did not, bore children or withheld that duty. Their memories of the rituals returned like a tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, until they learned to live with the scar as best they could, a private thing, not a public spectacle. The eldest daughter, however, survived in a new form, hardened, wiser, and given a voice at council she had never occupied before. She used it to add protections to royal protocol, to enshrine limits where the old rites had allowed abuse. Her survival became a slow law. Outside the palace, the story took on the garb of legend. Greek poets penned fiery lines about kings who could not withstand their own fears. Persian scribes, once complicit in silence, began to write more candid records of court life that included admonitions about cruelty. Over generations, the tale of Xerxes' daughters shifted from scandal to cautionary myth. No ruler could long thrive who fed on the inner lives of his family. When history tried to write Xerxes, it did so in fits and starts. Some chroniclers, anxious to flatter foreign victors, exaggerated his culpability into monstrous deeds. Others, faithful to monarchs, minimized the truth to a footnote. But the core remained. A king's terror had almost unstitched the social fabric he intended to bind together. The final, bitterest knowledge is this. What Xerxes performed upon his daughters was not a straightforward crime of blood and bone for which punishments are easily meted. It was an assault on personhood, the quiet, repetitive, legalistic erosion of autonomy disguised as sacred duty. It left no battlefield scars, no trophy to display, only minds that had been repurposed to bear the state's anxieties. And even when the law caught up, it could not unmake the nights in the veil or the chamber of reflections. Yet from those ruined nights came something else, a slow institutional humility. The eldest daughter's council helped craft measures to prevent secret rites from becoming instruments of terror. The memory of disappeared girls became a legal bookmark against the abuse of ritual. It was not justice in the narrow sense. It was a structural reweaving, a repair designed not to forget but to remember and to prevent. Xerxes lived many years beyond the council and died as all kings must, surrounded by a court that both loved and feared him, and with daughters who had been altered by his rule. His name remained vast in the world's annals, his conquests recited in schoolrooms and songs. But among the oldest lines of Persian law, among the hushed pages of palace scribes, and in the soft rooms where the women of the court washed their hands before prayers, the story of the daughters became the small, stubborn truth that no empire could rely on tyranny without paying a price. History remembers kings by the stone they raise or the river they divert. Sometimes it remembers them by the fragile things they broke. In the end, Xerxes' most terrible act was not to kill. It was to try to own the inner life of his children. That attempt cost him greater things than any battlefield defeat. It cost him a part of the humanity that binds ruler to ruled. And it taught an empire the slow, painful lesson that some treasures, daughters, minds, dignity, do not belong to the crown.